In this edition of FSW Conversations on Ete, we are talking to Suad Fakih. Suad writes about the future of luxury, particularly where capital, culture, tech, and consumer behavior collide. Her newsletter, Suad's Gems, spotlights the founders and investors who are reshaping the fashion, beauty, and wellness industries. She leads the Venture Success Committee at Marula Square and advises brands on growth and investment strategies. Previously, she has been a successful founder, commodities trader, and advisor to VCs, family offices, and founders. And we're really grateful to have you and your perspective with us for our summer series, Suad.
Thank you, Jessica and Bryce. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So the topics that we are talking with you about today, I think, are those that have been on the minds of many in the luxury industry, for the past, shall we say, a couple of quarters, maybe going beyond. And what's going on in the luxury economy. The macroeconomic environment has changed a lot coming out of what we call the post-pandemic super cycle, when it seemed like almost every luxury brand could make money, but now, of course, the environment is changing. So just right off the bat, I wonder, how do you judge the near-term prospects for luxury in this current environment, characterized, as it is by macroeconomic uncertainty, changes in the global trade regime, and the highly elevated geopolitical risk?
This is an excellent question. And I think what we're seeing is that it feels like the luxury industry, it's sort of in a pickle. And I don't think this is just macro or geopolitical, but it's also fundamental and structural. And I think a lot of it stems from the fact that there has been an erosion of consumer trust. Prices have gone up. Quality is not really sometimes even comparable to the past. And there's a lot of challenges, again, towards transparency. And I think that, in a way, has also changed a lot of the dynamics. And now we are seeing a lot of growth in, let's say, resale. And I also think that we've seen, on like the consumer side, a shift in mindset. And you can see this, for example, all over social media. And I think also something that has been happening on like a grand scheme is that a lot of these brands have also suffered from brand erosion. Like its brand equity has been eroded. And I think in a way, this is very much associated with the fact of the consumer, but also practices that the industry has engaged in. And that sort of it's hurting the growth of a lot of these brands. As you mentioned, during COVID, a lot of these brands rushed into the gold mine of disposable income. And now we are seeing 50 million consumers of luxury retreating, which were potentially more on the aspirational side, right? But the true luxury consumer has continued to buy in certain brands because we're not seeing that this is a homogeneous, it's not a homogeneous, result, to say the least. We are seeing some brands that have been able to sort of sustain their credibility. And it's sort of because they've remained true to their value proposition, their story, their DNA. And I think that sort of is not chasing every brand available, but really engaging with the consumer from not only, we talk a lot about generations, but I think more and more we are talking about psychographics, like people's values, what they want, what they understand. And I think those are the brands that are thriving right now. Meanwhile, some of the other brands that sort of like overextended, did a lot of acquisitions of a lot of like, to, let's say, LVMH, it's sort of like hurting right now. And I think in part is because we're also seeing an overextension of investment that hasn't really paid off as well. And I think, honestly, this is a really interesting time because we're also seeing new players that are like challenging this concept that I've been reading about mostly, which is mass luxury. And people feel like they want pieces that are authentic. Let's talk about ultra high net worth individuals and high net worth individuals, right? If you're traveling once a month, twice a month to different locations, then what is the difference if I walk to a shop in Shanghai or in Paris? And I think those are the questions that a lot of people are asking. And I think a lot of brands haven't really innovated. They haven't really innovated in practices, in materials. The tech has been lagging for a while in the luxury industry as a whole. And that sort of shows that people are asking, and I think consumers are understanding that they have power now. And I think that sort of has changed the dynamics as well. And now you're seeing like very few brands that are actually at really high price points that are justifiable to make those investments in. So I think there has been a lot of changes on how the consumer reacts to a brand in the midst of like all the challenges that we have right now on the macro environment and the geopolitical risks, which are obviously the tariffs, obviously a lot of uncertainty that we have. Of course, we have China decelerating, but we also have a different change in China, which is, and I think this is particularly interesting, is the deglobalization of taste. They sort of have retrieved more into traditional brands, in brands that actually represent their identity. And I think we are starting to see, even the big brands are trying to do this when they are expanding and they're having to adapt to those new values and demands and perception of luxury that vary from location to location. And I think that's sort of where I am seeing the industry right now, which is potentially in a reshuffling moment. It doesn't mean that the brands will not survive, I mean. But I think the question is here, which brands are going to withstand the time, but also which brands are going to be successful in this time. So yeah, I think it's a mix of a lot of factors.
No, that's really interesting. And I love you breaking apart, talking about the luxury consumer as kind of a more complicated portfolio of people, if you will, than the traditional divide by generation. And I'm just wondering if you could pick apart a little bit more on luxury consumer behavior, especially post COVID, and kind of which changes you see kind of persisting and which are, maybe more temporary. We've talked a lot, there's a lot of talk about sort of, the importance of Gen Z and you're sort of their more offline preferences and all of that. And I'm just curious for you what you see as the sort of biggest changes in who's shopping and how they're shopping and which
Yeah.
brands they prefer.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question as well. And I think right now um we are seeing that there has been a lot of shifts in the perception of luxury, right? And I think that post COVID, we used to have like I call this like the golden era of like legacy luxury. And I think sort of because, what we thought it was prestigious or had a heritage, it sort of was synonymous to status. And I think before that, a lot of it was happening. Like we had this global brands become like expanding. There was such a growth in the Western world and in Asia. There was creation of a lot of wealth. And I think the narrative was amplified by traditional media. They were like the gatekeepers of taste. You would see Vogue, you would see social media just starting off, right? And it sort of like amplified those messages. But I think post 2020, I think things change rapidly. And I think one of the reasons that sort of like, one of the things that drove this change was social media. Social media became something that we didn't even know it could become. So it went from being a place where, we would see influencers just showcasing products to becoming a discovery engine, shifting the power of who we trust. So we went from trusting a brand to trusting more an influencer, someone that, would make recommendations. And I think also, another thing that I think it's really fantastic about social media is that it made us more discerning as a consumer. It makes us like ask the tougher questions like, Is it good quality? Is it transparent? Am I aligned with this brand? And ultimately, right now, a big question, especially with the surge of like resale, is does it hold value? And I think younger generations are seeing this um, as more important than ever. I think when you are thinking about building a lot of people are thinking about building their closets, such as a portfolio investment. It's not only seen as I'm buying a piece of something. I think if you look at the art market, it hasn't really grown too much, but we're starting to see people collecting fashion pieces. We just sold the Birkin bag being sold by the original Birkin bag being sold by like over $10 million. And I think this sort of showcases all of these changes in behavior. I think tech has also become a big part of it. Tech has also like, it's a way where younger generations are expecting like brands to have that seamless movement from sort of like going online to physical. And I think when we look at younger generations like Gen Z and Gen Alpha specifically, like what we are seeing is that they are saturated being online, which is very counterintuitive. So they are looking for places where they can have in real life experiences. And they're actually looking for brands that offer more than what would say like a product, but like a community, or that would offer, that place where you have sort of that subculture and you can connect to an individual that actually shares your values. I think there's beauty brands that have done an excellent job. They're not necessarily luxury. I think Rare Beauty is an example of this, which is extraordinary. I've been writing about them for a while, and it's just truly incredible the way that they've been able to nail some of the two of the biggest challenges that younger generations have, which is the lack of community, because there's such a loneliness epidemic right now in younger generations, and also challenges with mental health. And they've wrapped up a value proposition that sort of taps into these and created a brand equity that is extremely good, because people want to actually be associated because they actually feel that these are safe spaces. I think also something that I'm seeing more and more is that younger generations, what they really want as well is they sort of want these places where you sort of have that mix between real life experiences and sort of like that offers the capability of being online at the same time. So let me give you an example. So I'm talking here about infrastructure. And I think that one is an interesting one because they want to go to places and have enjoyment, but they still want to be connected. And a lot of places, they don't offer like free Wi-Fi or things like that. So I think it's about changing a little bit the experience of being in store. And I think it's also thinking about what actually moves them. For Gen Alpha, I think it's something that is quite interesting is that they love colorful packaging. They're very much into beauty. And I think something that for me was mind blowing is that in 2030, like they don't command a lot of power, right? But indirect power, Gen Alpha has around 15 trillion. And I think it's based on not 15 trillion, 15 billion, which I think it's basically their indirect influence that they have with their parents on decision making. So it's incredible to look at these numbers. And I think a big difference is that younger generations expect brands to meet them where they are. Not, they don't have, like, they don't want to go places. They want to be, they want brands to understand where they operate. And I think this is really interesting. I saw Miu Miu did an excellent collaboration with Snapchat actually, and it had really great results. And I think that's a really smart way to connecting where the consumer is right now. Build that relationship, educate the consumer, and then grow with that consumer. And for example, like I am seeing more and more brands collaborating in Roblox, and I think that's like a really interesting space as well. I just saw I think it was Puma who just launched one, and I asked the person that is leading the initiative, like, who is your target audience? And she said, you'd be surprised. It's not only Gen Alpha and Gen C, but it's also millennials. So we are seeing a lot of changes in the way we consume and what we expect from brands as well.
Oh, thanks so much. I think you covered so many areas there. So many, you see so much change going on in the industry, and it's sometimes difficult, I think, to summarize very quickly what's going on now, much less to kind of understand, and predict accurately, what's going to happen, in the months and the year ahead. But I'll ask you to kind of put on your futurology hat, so to speak, and look at some of the trends that you've identified and, either pull out extrapolations or better than that, come out with, do things that we're not thinking about now. So if you had to look at the luxury landscape, and say, look, this is what I think, it's how it's going to look different, how it's going to look the same in the next 10 to 15 years. What would be surprising? What would be counterintuitive? And maybe in some cases, what would be not surprising? So if you were to kind of put that lens together, kind of what would you say to consumers and to investors in the space?
Well, I don't believe in predicting the future. And for me, it's more thinking. I think what you just said is thinking and understanding what is happening right now to understand where the future might lead us. And I think something that it's for me very obvious, and I think is that luxury has been part of us since the beginning of humanity. And I don't think it's going anywhere. I think we all like to indulge in something. We all like, and I think status has also been part of society since we know it. I think what is changing is the how and the what. And I think in the future, or like looking into the future, I think this will continue to change and this will continue to evolve. And I think that's what brands will need to understand is it's like, how do you get there? How do you communicate to the consumer? How do you deliver to those needs that are constantly changing without diluting who you are? How do you keep generating value from a place that feels authentic and not and I think authenticity is such a big word that we hear everywhere, but it's really scarce and really rare actually. And I think one of the things that I do see in the future, and I think it's happening right now, is that I am seeing a big technological disruption in the fashion industry. And I think it's in the luxury industry and in fashion, beauty, wellness, everywhere you go. I think something that is quite interesting, and it's something that I've been observing, is that it's happening in places that you might not expect. So let me give you an example. Traditionally, we've seen that luxury brands are mainly in Europe, right? But most of a lot of the disruption is coming from a lot of places and like the US. Like right now, what we're seeing is that there's been like a huge movement with fashion tech right now. And I think we're seeing a lot of money being allocated with, especially with AI. So I think right now what we're seeing is that actually something that hadn't been invested in the last like 5 or 6 years, we're seeing a lot of investors rushing into it. And we are seeing a lot of investments, obviously. And let me give you a couple of examples, like Daydream, which is an AI search engine that uses natural language to. So basically, what it does is like right now, what we do is like we go into the search engine and we just type black bag and a plethora of handbags appear. But just like imagine the cognitive overload that we have to go through when we are searching. That's sort of like what happens in there is that it sort of deters the consumer from buying anything. And now what we can do is like we can shop with context and also with like with our personal needs. So I can go in there and say, like, I am traveling to Saint Tropez. I'd love like a transparent dress to go to a beach club. And that changes the dynamics. I think a lot of it is going to be around the frictions that we can't see. There's a lot of companies like right now that have built open innovation division. So we have LVMH, which has a really strong open innovation division. We also have Kering. We also have even Hermes has a VC arm in San Francisco. So I think all of these companies know that they are they need to get ahead and they need to invest in these technologies. And I think something that might be counterintuitive in the sense of is that I do think that we're going to see a reshuffle. And I think I do believe a lot in the Lindy effect from Nassim Taleb, which is like the longer something has been in history, the most likely it will persist. So if you look at the diagram of like when these brands have been created, you have like a lot of them are, have a lot of years of legacy. But the question is not, are they going to exist, but are they going to continue having that brand equity and value that we see right now? And who might be the newcomers as well that will change the dynamics and actually earn their market share and become more top of mind. So I think that's sort of like what I am seeing right now. And I think the other thing obviously is like we are seeing a lot of the blurred lines coming, like more blurred lines happening between beauty, wellness, hospitality. I think that one is a really big one, and experiences. I think we're hearing all about experiences, but what do experiences mean? I don't think it's only like an activation or a pop up here or there. I think people are looking for things that are extremely rare and unique, and that create some kind of, gratification that allows them to be different. And that's why I think I'm starting to see more interesting things happening. Like the Four Seasons has this, um, that in Maui, they have this retreat where you pay like $4,000 for a longevity protocol. And, things like this are starting to become more the norm for what ultra high net worth individuals and net worth individuals desire. So we are going from an object, um, you know, society into more experiential, improving quality of life. So I think that's sort of like how is changing. And that's sort of where I see a lot of the changes potentially coming.
No, that's really interesting. And I love how you've sort of yoked together technology as a change factor and almost this idea of technology as an enabler of better, kind of more streamlined experiences. I'm just wondering if you could unpack that a little bit because technology in AI, especially, is, as you said, is a lot of buzz right now. And there's a lot of brands rushing to invest in, well, frankly, a lot of tech they may or may not need. We talk a lot about the need for contextualized technology and digital innovation and e-com that really add value and encourage better customer journeys. And I'm just wondering for you, how are digital innovation and e-commerce kind of reshaping the customer journey? You talked a lot about sort of customers having more power now and kind of this sense of they know what they want and then they're not going to rely on brands to tell them that. But from the other side, how then do brands balance this need to, be part of the modern world, but also still, have their heritage footprint to get that differentiation?
I love what you bring up. And I think you have an excellent point there. I think right now we are in a disruption phase where we have a lot of uncertainties. And like, I think a lot of like the AI technology, unfortunately, it's not there yet. Obviously, we are a lot farther ahead than we were 5 or 10 years ago. But I do think we're still have a lot of like questions. So for example, like I am starting to see a lot of like companies investing in AI chatbots or like not chatbots, but like chat, sort of like an AI search engine. Do we really know that that's what the consumer wants? Is it like, do we need, and I think we are in a moment where we're going to have to, it's going to be, you're going to have to invest. Like you can't invest like everything, but you're going to have to like sort of invest something to actually test what works and what doesn't work. Because I think we don't have all the answers yet because it's such an incipient, at least like on like the e-commerce side of things. Like right now, e-commerce only does like 2 to 3% conversion, which is very low. And I think part of it is because it's not intuitive and it's overwhelming. And sometimes like we open like 10 tabs at the same time and we're trying to compare a lot of things and we end up empty handed and more confused. And I think sort of like the role of a brand is to make it easier for us to make those decisions and to fall in love with whatever they have to offer, for us not to have to do the whole process, the whole dance of comparing 20,000 bags to get maybe to the first one we already wanted or have an idea of. And I think that's why we are seeing a lot of like what I mentioned, like AI search engines or like AI styling capabilities. And we've already seen like in the beauty industry, a lot of VR and AR investments in being embedded in the e-commerces. We have a lot of that in L'Oreal has been leading the way in that, and even Chanel. But I do think that we're going to have to test out what actually people want, because I don't really think we are there yet. I think we have a lot of like some of the tools are coming up, but I don't think there's anything that aggregates a solution entirely. I think we're starting to see more e-commerces to be built as AI digitally native, but we're not even there yet. And I think something that has become more and more top of mind is that it has to have a human touch. It has to have taste. It has to have, it has to be visually engaging, because at the end of the day, luxury is not a rational buy. It's an emotional connection. It's an extension of an identity. It's so many things that are so personal and embedded within us. So I don't have a straightforward answer for this, but I do think that you're going to have to test out things. And sometimes it's better to wait out what others do and understand and write sort of like that, because, like, sometimes, like, the first mover's advantage is not necessarily the best. Sometimes, other players, they end up understanding and leveraging what you've already built on. And I think smart brands will start testing things out, not to go all in, and then they will understand what's better. But I think that's going to take us the next like 1 or 2 years to actually figure out a little bit more of what is the right customer journey, what is the right user experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that certainly points to, certainly the mention of tech, changes in customer journeys, is the role that demographics plays in the prospects for luxury in different demographic groups. If you look at market commentary, you'll see breakdowns of, how Gen Z, Gen Alpha are different than, say, Gen X, millennial type of consumers. And a lot of these types of these perspectives, I think, are valid, but sometimes you see a lot of blurring the lines between these generations. And if you look down the breakdown of luxury purchases, older generations still continue to represent a large portion of the luxury market. They may, if you like, not represent the growth of the industry, but certainly in terms of the stock of revenues, they're still quite large. I wonder if you could, kind of help us reflect on just a little bit, the role, of generational change certainly has been, and you've discussed this a little bit, how you see this kind of impacting the design, the marketing, kind of the purpose of luxury brands, maybe talk a little bit about maybe some of the frictions on preparing for this new market, while continuing to, to want to, you kind of articulate that authentic brand vision to consumers that, are older, and have a very kind of preset view of what luxury should be and what brands, should look like when they encounter them.
I love this question because it's something I find really interesting. I think I want to start by talking about, let's say, Hermes. And the reason why I'm thinking about Hermes is that I think they have been able to do this in a very good way. They have a brand that actually is authentic to their storytelling. The elements are the same. So you see the equestrian elements and the nautical elements and all of these things that are still and will still be relevant. But I love what they do online. So one of the things that I love that they do online is that they hire artists, and each artist has a way of representing some of these, leisures or, hobbies that people have. And I think, you know, older generations have a very preset way of thinking of luxury, but they also want novelty and freshness. And I feel that a lot of the brands that actually do a good job in being playful with class, with taste, they are rewarded. I think Loewe has done an incredible job as well on that. They still carry the same bags. The Apostle bag has been there for like 10 years and it hasn't lost its relevance. It has gone through a reinvention process that allows the brand to remain culturally relevant, which is crucial for younger generations. But it's the same handbag that we know since it was created. And I think younger generations are positively impacting a lot of things that have been trickling down to other generations. So we are seeing younger generations um, having more of a drive for products that are sustainable and that carry transparency. And I think honestly, if you look at this is actually a very positive thing. And it is an extremely positive thing because it can change the dynamics of what we see in the luxury industry. And that's why I talk more about psychographics, because I think that those values and ideas, they can go with anyone regardless of their age. I do think, as I had mentioned before, that Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they look at things in a way like they want brands to meet them where they are. They want them to deliver products that actually that talk about their culture, and that talk about their values. But that doesn't mean that you have to dilute yourself. And I think, for example, like a lot of brands now are rushing into Substack. And Substack has become such a big place now. It used to be only about writers, but because the sense of community has been lagging and the way younger generations see institutions, which is they don't have the same value, they're looking for brands sort of like that place where they can have those interactions and that they can build those communities. And I think just because you create like, let's say, or meet a younger generation in Roblox, it doesn't mean that it has to affect the way that you communicate in the grand scheme of things, or the craftsmanship doesn't have to be devaluated, or the value proposition has to be devaluated. And I think right now, we are in one of the biggest, like the last 10 years have been extremely interesting because they've been some of the years that we've seen the most wealth generation in history. And I think if you look at that means that yes, a lot of people call it the silver generation, or they do have disposable income, and a lot of the brands are not doing a great job to communicate to them. So I think we are focusing the younger generations because that's what's coming next. But when you forget that bracket, then you're missing as well on that potential customer that will be loyal, because I think that is completely different. Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they love dupes. They love interchange, like loyalty for them. It's not a big thing. It's more about things that serve a purpose. And if it's, something that creates a vibe, then that's good enough. You don't have to have the original. But older generations, they value other things. And the problem is that when you have, unfortunately, challenges with craftsmanship, or, let's say like what just happened with Laura Piano, that sort of hurts the brand. And it sort of like creates that amplification in social media and in other places where it's sort of like validates that idea of like craftsmanship is not really there, the value is not really there, then just go to resell. Let's just go to other places. Let's go to a brand that actually feels more new or authentic. And that's sort of like you're doing two terrible things at the same time, because you're losing your loyal consumer, but then you're also losing your future consumer. And I think that's a really important thing to look into. And it's like you really need to understand who you are serving as a brand. And even if you want to capture younger audiences, then you have to do it in a way where you communicate with them in their spaces and it doesn't necessarily dilute who you are. And that's sort of how I see it.
Great. Fantastic. Listen, I think we're running up against time, but you have really taken us on kind of a tour de force of a number of the major cyclical, and as you kind of leaned heavily into the structural kind of drivers of what kind of seen over kind of since the pandemic and what we can kind of expect going forward. I really appreciate you sharing your insights today. I really found this to be really fascinating. I think will provide a lot of kind of inspiration for some of our research here in the months ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.